The echo of a gunshot hadn't yet faded when Violet McGraw stepped off the dusty stagecoach into the unforgiving heat of Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, 1885. Her throat parched as she surveyed the town's single dirt road lined with weathered buildings. The leather-wrapped handle of her polished oak cane pressed reassuringly against her palm as she placed her weight upon it, preparing for the familiar stares that would surely follow. "Need a hand with your trunk, miss," the stagecoach driver called down, already hefting her modest belongings. "Thank you kindly," Violet replied, reaching into her reticule for a coin. The mid-afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, causing sweat to bead along her hairline despite the wide brim of her straw bonnet. 24 years old, and traveling alone to a frontier town, her aunt would have been scandalized. But Aunt Margaret was dead now, along with the rest of Violet's family, leaving her with little choice but to accept the teaching position that awaited her. "That's quite a fancy stick you got there," the driver remarked as he set her trunk on the ground. His eyes lingered on her cane, then traveled to her right leg, which was noticeably thinner than her left beneath her skirts. Violet's spine stiffened. "It serves its purpose." The driver shrugged, pocketing her coin before climbing back onto his perch. Town's not exactly built for folks with difficulties. Schoolhouse is down past the Mercantile, about a quarter mile. He gestured vaguely down the street, then snapped his reins. The stagecoach lurched forward, leaving Violet in a cloud of dust. She coughed, waving away the debris, and contemplated her trunk. It wasn't particularly large, but she couldn't possibly drag it while using her cane. Perhaps the proprietor of the nearby general store might. "You must be the new schoolteacher." Violet turned at the voice, coming face to face with a woman whose stern expression matched her severe black dress. The woman's eyes immediately fell to Violet's cane, her thin lips pursing in obvious disapproval. "Yes, I'm Miss McGraw." Violet extended her free hand, which the woman reluctantly accepted. "Mrs. Holloway, head of the school board." She released Violet's hand quickly, as though contact might somehow transmit whatever condition necessitated the cane. "Your correspondence didn't mention any physical limitations." Heat rushed to Violet's cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "I assure you, my abilities as an educator are not affected," Mrs. Holloway sniffed. "We shall see. The children can be quite rambunctious. I wonder if you'll be able to maintain proper discipline." Her gaze swept over Violet's form again. "Teaching requires stamina, Miss McGraw." Before Violet could respond, a deep voice interrupted. "Mrs. Holloway, I believe you're needed at the church. Reverend Patterson was asking after you." Violet turned to find herself looking up at a tall man in a worn leather vest, white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a cowboy hat pushed back on his head, revealing sandy brown hair and the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. "Mr. Xavier," Mrs. Holloway acknowledged stiffly, "I was just welcoming our new schoolteacher, so I heard." His gaze met Violet's, and she was surprised to find no pity there, just a warm curiosity. "Isaac Xavier, madam. I run the livery stable." "Violet McGraw," she replied, finding herself momentarily forgetting Mrs. Holloway's presence. Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat. "I expect you at the schoolhouse tomorrow morning, Miss McGraw. 7 o'clock sharp. We'll discuss your duties then." With a final disapproving glance at Violet's cane, she turned and marched away. Isaac Xavier watched her go, then turned back to Violet with a half-smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Don't mind her. Mrs. Holloway disapproves of most things in life, including joy." Despite herself, Violet laughed. "I've encountered her type before." Isaac nodded toward her trunk. "Need help getting settled? The boarding house is just down the street." "That would be most kind, Mr. Xavier." "Isaac, please." He hefted her trunk easily, tucking it under one arm. "Most folks around here don't stand on ceremony." As they walked, Violet was acutely aware of the uneven gait her cane created, the rhythmic thump against the dirt road. She'd grown accustomed to the stairs in Boston, but here on the frontier, where physical strength was so valued, she felt the weight of curious eyes from the mercantile porch and saloon entrance more keenly. "Is it permanent?" Isaac asked suddenly, nodding toward her leg. Violet nearly stumbled in surprise at his directness. Most people danced around the subject, speaking in euphemisms if they addressed it at all. "Yes," she answered, deciding that honesty might be refreshing. "Childhood fever. The doctors said I was fortunate it only affected one leg." Isaac nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Town's not easy to navigate with those boardwalks. Some are rotted through in places. I could point out the trouble spots if you like." There was no condescension in his offer, just practical helpfulness. "I would appreciate that." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and peeling white paint. Isaac set down her trunk to open the door, and as Violet stepped past him, she caught the scent of leather, horses, and something uniquely male. "Miss Patterson runs this place," Isaac explained. "She's the Reverend's sister, strict but fair." The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and Violet paused to let her eyes adjust. The parlor was clean but sparsely furnished, with a faded settee and several wooden chairs arranged around a stone fireplace. "Hello," Isaac called. "Miss Patterson, your new boarder has arrived." A door at the back of the house opened, and a thin woman with graying hair pulled into a tight bun appeared, wiping her hands on an apron. Her gaze, like everyone else's, went immediately to Violet's cane. "Oh my," she said, her voice soft with surprise. "No one mentioned." "Miss McGraw is our new schoolteacher," Isaac said firmly, setting the trunk down in the center of the room. "Yes, of course." Miss Patterson composed herself quickly. "Welcome to Cottonwood Springs, Miss McGraw. I have your room prepared upstairs." Violet's heart sank. Stairs, of course there would be stairs. She managed them, certainly, but they were always a challenge, especially when carrying anything. "Perhaps a ground-floor room would be more suitable," Isaac suggested, his voice casual but his meaning clear. Miss Patterson flushed. "I am afraid the only ground-floor bedroom is my own." "I can manage stairs," Violet said quickly, not wanting to cause trouble on her first day in town. "I've had plenty of practice." Miss Patterson wrung her hands. "The washroom is on this floor at least, and meals are served in the dining room through there." She pointed to a doorway off the parlor. "Thank you," Violet said. "I'm sure everything will be fine." Isaac picked up her trunk again. "I'll carry this up for you." The staircase was narrow, and Violet had to concentrate to navigate it with her cane. Isaac followed patiently behind, not rushing her. "Second door on the right," Miss Patterson called up. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, washstand, dresser, and a small writing desk beneath the window. Isaac set her trunk at the foot of the bed and stepped back. "Town's not much, but it grows on you," he said, settling his hat more firmly on his head. "If you need anything, the livery's just past the saloon." "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Xavier." "Isaac," he corrected again with a smile. "Welcome to Cottonwood Springs, Miss McGraw." After he left, Violet sank onto the edge of the bed, her leg aching from the journey. She massaged it absently through her skirt, wondering what she had gotten herself into. The townspeople's reactions weren't unexpected. She'd seen that mixture of pity, curiosity, and discomfort countless times before. But something about being here, so far from anything familiar, made their stares cut deeper. She pulled her cane across her lap, running her fingers over the polished wood. Her father had commissioned it for her 16th birthday, replacing the utilitarian piece she'd used since her illness. The handle was carved into the shape of a bird in flight, a reminder, he'd said, that there were many ways to soar. Violet closed her eyes, fatigue washing over her. Tomorrow she would meet her students, and she could only hope they would be more accepting than Mrs. Holloway. The next morning dawned cool but promised heat as Violet made her way toward the schoolhouse. She'd risen early to allow plenty of time for the walk, not wanting to arrive breathless and disheveled. Her black skirt and high-necked white blouse were crisp and professional, her chestnut hair pulled back into a neat bun. She carried a small satchel with her personal teaching materials books her father had given her, lesson plans she'd carefully crafted, and a small wooden apple, another gift from her father, who had believed in symbols. The schoolhouse sat slightly apart from the main street, a white clapboard building with a small bell tower. As Violet approached, she saw Mrs. Holloway waiting on the steps, pocket watch in hand. 7 o'clock precisely, Violet said as she reached the bottom step. Mrs. Holloway snapped the watch closed. Punctuality is essential for a teacher. She turned and climbed the steps, clearly expecting Violet to follow. Inside, the schoolhouse was a single room with rows of desks facing a larger desk and blackboard. A pot-bellied stove stood in one corner, and bookshelves lined the back wall. It was simple but functional, not unlike the schoolhouse where Violet had received her own education. "We have 28 students, ages 6 to 16, Mrs. Holloway explained, moving to the teacher's desk. "Some only attend when farm work allows, the older boys especially." "I understand," Violet said, setting her satchel on the desk. "I grew up in rural Massachusetts. The harvest always took precedence." Mrs. Holloway looked surprised, as though she'd assumed Violet was a city girl. "Yes, well. Our last teacher, Mr. Collins, left rather abruptly when gold was discovered near Prescott. The children have been without formal instruction for nearly 2 months." "I'll need to assess their levels then," Violet mused, already considering how to group them. "Indeed." Mrs. Holloway's eyes drifted to Violet's cane again. "Miss McGraw, I must be frank. Several board members expressed concerns about your condition. Teaching requires authority, and children can be quick to exploit any perceived weakness." Violet had prepared for this. "Mrs. Holloway, I've been teaching for 6 years. I began as an assistant in Boston, then took a position at a country school outside Worcester. Not once has my cane prevented me from maintaining discipline or effectively educating my students. Perhaps in the East, where refinement is valued. But this is the frontier. Strength matters here." "There are many kinds of strength," Violet countered, meeting the woman's gaze steadily. Before Mrs. Holloway could respond, the door opened, and a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest entered. "Morning, Mrs. Holloway," he said, tipping his hat. "Thought I'd stop by and introduce myself to our new teacher." "Sheriff Adams," Mrs. Holloway acknowledged. "This is Miss McGraw." The sheriff stepped forward, offering his hand. "Welcome to Cottonwood Springs, madam. My boy Tommy will be in your class. Bright kid, but mischievous as they come." "I look forward to meeting him," Violet said, appreciating his straightforward manner. "Sheriff," Mrs. Holloway interjected, "perhaps you could explain to Miss McGraw the importance of maintaining order in this town." "As I was just saying, if she's been teaching for years, I reckon she knows how to handle a classroom," the sheriff interrupted, giving Violet a conspiratorial wink. "Besides, I've known teachers who could silence a room with just a look. Don't need 2 good legs for that." Mrs. Holloway's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. "Yes, well, I should be going. The children will begin arriving shortly." She gathered her shawl around her shoulders. "I'll check in periodically to see how you're progressing." After she left, Sheriff Adams chuckled. "Don't let her scare you. Her bark's worse than her bite." "I've faced tougher critics," Violet assured him, though in truth, Mrs. Holloway's attitude worried her. If the head of the school board had such doubts, how many others shared them? "Xavier mentioned you arrived yesterday," the sheriff said, moving toward the door. "Said you seemed capable enough. That's high praise coming from him. Man doesn't waste words." Something warm flickered in Violet's chest at the thought that Isaac had spoken of her. "He was very kind." "He's a good man. Lost his wife and child to influenza a few years back. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always the first to lend a hand when someone needs it." The sheriff settled his hat back on his head. "Well, I'll let you get ready. Good luck with the little monsters." As the sheriff predicted, children began arriving shortly after he left. They filed in, curious eyes taking in the new teacher. Several stared openly at her cane, whispering behind their hands. Violet had expected this and met each stare with a friendly smile, introducing herself as they entered. The morning was a whirlwind of names, assessments, and establishing routines. By noon, when she dismissed them for the lunch hour, Violet had already identified her likely troublemakers, including Tommy Adams and her eager learners. As the children scattered, some running home for meals, others opening lunch pails brought from home, Violet sank gratefully into her chair. She'd just taken out her own modest lunch bread, cheese, and an apple when a knock at the door drew her attention. To her surprise, Isaac Xavier stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said, stepping inside. "Thought you might want to know how your first morning went." Violet smiled, pleased by his unexpected appearance. "It went well, I think. Though I suspect several of the boys are testing my limits. That's to be expected." Isaac glanced around the room, taking in the desks and blackboard. "Been a while since I sat in a schoolroom." "Did you attend school here?" He shook his head. "Texas. My pa was a rancher." "Education wasn't a priority, but my ma insisted I learn my letters at least." He gestured to her lunch. "Mind if I join you? Brought some extra." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. It wasn't strictly proper for her to dine alone with a man, but frontier towns operated under different social rules than Boston. Isaac pulled up a student's chair, setting it across from her desk, and produced a cloth-wrapped package from his saddlebag. "Miss Patterson's biscuits and ham. She gives me extra sometimes." "That's very thoughtful of her." Violet broke off a piece of her bread. "And thoughtful of you to share. Figure you could use a friendly face. Town can be standoffish with newcomers, especially," he cut himself off, looking embarrassed, "especially cripples." Violet supplied, surprising herself with her bluntness. Isaac's eyes widened slightly. "That's not what I was going to say, but it's what many are thinking." She set down her bread, suddenly not hungry. "Mrs. Holloway made it quite clear she has doubts about my abilities." "Mrs. Holloway hasn't had an original thought in 20 years, Isaac said with unexpected vehemence. "She just parrots whatever Reverend Patterson says, and he's stuck in 1850. A startled laugh escaped Violet. "Mr. Xavier, I'm shocked by your candor." He grinned, a flash of white teeth against his tanned skin. "Isaac," he corrected for the third time, "and out here, folks say what they mean. It's one of the things I like about the West." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Violet couldn't help noticing the strength in his hands as he broke apart a biscuit, the way his shoulders filled out his simple shirt. He was undeniably handsome, but it was his straightforward manner that drew her most. "Sheriff mentioned you lost your wife," she said softly, then immediately regretted her presumptuousness. "I apologize, that's terribly forward of me. It's all right." Isaac's expression sobered. "Rebecca and our son, James. Influenza swept through 3 years ago, took a lot of good people." "I'm very sorry," he nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "Life's not guaranteed out here or anywhere, I suppose. You learn to take the good days when they come." He glanced at her cane, which she'd propped against the desk. "That's fine craftsmanship. My father had it made for me." She reached for it, running her fingers over the wooden bird. "He said I should have something beautiful if I needed to rely on it every day. Smart man." Isaac finished his biscuit, brushing crumbs from his hands. "Listen, I was thinking, town socials coming up Saturday at the church. Whole town turns out, even the ranchers from outside come in. Might be a good way for you to meet everyone on equal footing." A social, Violet hesitated. Such gatherings inevitably involved dancing, which she avoided. "I'm not sure." "Doesn't have to be dancing," Isaac said, as if reading her thoughts. "Just food and conversation. Folks will be curious about you anyway. Better to meet them all at once than have them dropping by the schoolhouse with flimsy excuses." She smiled at that. "I suppose you're right." "I could escort you," he offered, then quickly added, just as a friendly gesture. "Help introduce you around." The idea was appealing. Having Isaac's steady presence beside her would make facing the whole town less daunting. "That would be very kind, thank you." A bell rang in the distance, signaling the end of the lunch hour. Isaac stood, gathering the remains of their meal. I should get back to the livery, got a mare about to foal. He settled his hat on his head. Noon tomorrow. Violet nodded, realizing he was proposing to make their lunch a regular occurrence. I'll look forward to it. As Isaac left, the first of the children began trickling back in. Violet noticed several curious glances following his departure, and one of the older girls, Lucy Wilson, had a knowing smirk on her face. "Is Mr. Xavier your beau, Miss McGraw?" she asked boldly. "Certainly not," Violet replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Xavier was simply being neighborly. Lucy exchanged looks with her friend Sarah. "My ma says he hasn't shown interest in any woman since his wife died, said he's married to that livery now." "That's quite enough gossip, Lucy," Violet said firmly. "Please take your seat. We have arithmetic to cover this afternoon." As the classroom filled, Violet couldn't help wondering about Isaac's unexpected attention. Surely it was just kindness, as he'd said. After all, what man would be seriously interested in a woman who needed a cane to walk? Especially here, where physical strength and endurance were so valued. The afternoon passed quickly, and by the time Violet dismissed the children at 4 o'clock, she was exhausted but satisfied. Despite their initial curiosity about her cane, most of the students had responded well to her teaching methods. A few of the older boys had tested her authority with whispered comments and nudges, but she'd managed them with the practiced ease of someone who had dealt with far worse in Boston's crowded schoolrooms. As she gathered her materials, preparing for the walk back to the boarding house, Tommy Adams lingered, scuffing his boot against the floorboards. "Miss McGraw," he said finally, "can I ask you something? Of course, Tommy. Does your leg hurt all the time?" The directness of children never failed to surprise her. "Sometimes," she answered honestly, "but I've had many years to get used to it." He nodded, digesting this. "My pa says you're brave to come all the way out here by yourself." Violet smiled, touched by the sheriff's assessment. "I don't know about brave. Sometimes we do things because we must, not because we're courageous. Pa says that's what bravery is, doing what needs doing even when you're scared." Tommy picked up his slate and books. "See you tomorrow, Miss McGraw." "Good afternoon, Tommy." Alone in the schoolhouse, Violet took a moment to steady herself. The day had been more emotionally taxing than she'd anticipated. Every interaction seemed weighted with unspoken judgments about her capability, from Mrs. Holloway's open skepticism to the children's curious stares. And then there was Isaac Xavier, whose easy acceptance felt like a cool drink after a long thirst. She had just locked the schoolhouse door when she noticed a small group of women watching her from the steps of the nearby church. Among them was Mrs. Holloway, and from their expressions, Violet knew she had been the subject of their conversation. One woman leaned close to another, whispering something that made the others frown in Violet's direction. Squaring her shoulders, Violet nodded politely to the group and began her walk back to the boarding house, her cane tapping a steady rhythm against the hard-packed earth. She had survived worse scrutiny in Boston. She would endure it here as well. The next day brought steady rain, turning Cottonwood Springs Main Street into a muddy quagmire. Violet had foreseen the difficulty and left the boarding house early, allowing extra time to navigate the treacherous footing with her cane. Despite her precautions, by the time she reached the schoolhouse, the hem of her skirt was sodden and splattered with mud, and her boots were caked with it. The children arrived in similar states, tracking mud onto the schoolhouse floor. Violet set aside her planned morning lessons, and instead organized a cleaning brigade, turning the mess into an impromptu lesson on cooperation and responsibility. By mid-morning, the floor was relatively clean, and the children were engaged in their regular studies, the rain drumming steadily on the roof. When noon arrived, Violet wondered if Isaac would brave the downpour to join her for lunch. She was both disappointed and relieved when no knock came at the door. Disappointed because she had enjoyed his company, relieved because the schoolroom was filled with children taking shelter from the rain, and their lunch would have had a dozen curious witnesses. She was helping 6-year-old Abigail Mason sound out a difficult word when the door opened, bringing a gust of damp air. Isaac stood there, rain dripping from his hat and coat, a covered basket in one hand. "Thought you might all appreciate something warm on a day like this," he said, lifting the basket. Miss Patterson sent over fresh bread and soup. The children cheered, momentarily forgetting their studies. Violet felt a rush of gratitude both for the thoughtful gesture and for the fact that he had included all the children, making his visit clearly proper and above reproach. "That's incredibly kind," she said, moving to take the basket. "Children, what do we say to Mr. Xavier?" "Thank you, Mr. Xavier," they chorused with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Isaac removed his hat, shaking water from it. "Happy to help. Miss Patterson mentioned you'd left without much breakfast, Miss McGraw, said the mud gave you trouble." Violet felt her cheeks warm at the implication that he'd been asking about her. "It was slow going this morning," she admitted. Isaac glanced at the muddy floor near the door. "I've got some planks at the livery. Could put together a proper walkway from the street to the schoolhouse steps. Save everyone some trouble." "That's not necessary, I insist," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "It's the kind of thing that should have been done years ago anyway." One of the older boys, Peter Wilson, spoke up. "I could help, Mr. Xavier. Pa's got me working with wood since I was 10. "Much obliged, Peter. Come by the livery after school lets out, weather permitting." Isaac settled his damp hat back on his head. "I should get back. Horses get restless in this weather." After he left, Lucy Wilson sidled up to Violet's desk. "My brother never volunteers for extra work," she said meaningfully. "He must really want to help you, Miss McGraw. He's being considerate of everyone who uses the schoolhouse," Violet corrected, though she suspected Lucy's assessment might be partially true. "Now, let's serve this soup before it gets cold." The rain continued through the afternoon, but had slowed to a drizzle by dismissal time. Violet watched the children splash through puddles as they headed home, their energy undiminished by the weather. She was gathering her things when she heard a horse approach, followed by a knock at the door. Isaac stood there, leading a saddled chestnut mare. "Thought you might appreciate a ride back to the boarding house. Mud's only going to get worse as people track through it." Violet hesitated. She hadn't been on a horse since her illness. "I'm not sure." "Daisy here is the gentlest mare in the territory," Isaac assured her, "and I'll lead her, nice and slow." The prospect of slogging through mud that would make her cane nearly useless was decidedly unappealing. "If you're certain she's gentle." "Like a lamb," Isaac promised, offering his arm. "Let me help you up." Mounting was awkward, but Isaac was patient, supporting her weak leg as she settled into the saddle. He handed up her cane, which she secured alongside the saddle, then took Daisy's reins and began leading the horse carefully down the muddy street. "Thank you for the soup," Violet said. The children were delighted. "Wasn't my idea," Isaac admitted. "Miss Patterson suggested it when she saw the weather. She's warming to you." "I'm glad to hear it. I'm not sure Mrs. Holloway ever will." Isaac glanced back at her, a wry smile on his face. "Mrs. Holloway doesn't warm to anyone, but the rest of the town seems to like you." "Sheriff says Tommy actually talked about school at dinner last night. That's a first." They passed the church, where Reverend Patterson was helping an elderly parishioner navigate the muddy churchyard. The Reverend paused, watching them with undisguised interest. "People will talk," Violet murmured, nodding toward the minister. "People always talk," Isaac replied easily. "Nature of small towns, does it bother you?" She considered the question. In Boston, propriety had been paramount. A single woman riding through town with an unmarried man would have caused weeks of gossip. But here, practicality seemed to trump social conventions. "I suppose not," she said finally. "As long as it doesn't affect my position at the school." The town's too desperate for a teacher to care about a little harmless gossip. They had reached the boarding house, and Isaac helped her dismount, his strong hands spanning her waist. Besides, everyone knows I'm just being neighborly." There was something in his tone that made Violet wonder if that was entirely true. "Of course," she agreed, retrieving her cane. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Xavier." "Isaac," he corrected automatically, then smiled. "You're still coming to the social on Saturday." "Yes, if the weather improves. It will. Rain never lasts long here." He tipped his hat. "I'll come by around 6. As Violet watched him lead Daisy away, she was struck by an unfamiliar feeling, a lightness in her chest, a sense of anticipation. It had been years since she'd looked forward to a social gathering. Usually, they meant sitting on the sidelines, watching others dance while fielding pitying looks and well-intentioned but painful comments. But the prospect of attending with Isaac somehow made the usual dread fade to background noise. He saw her cane, but didn't seem defined by it in his perception of her. It was refreshing and dangerous. She couldn't afford to develop feelings for a man who was likely just being kind to the newcomer. Especially when that kindness might evaporate once the novelty wore off. Saturday arrived with clear skies and the fresh, washed feeling that often follows heavy rain. Violet spent the morning helping Miss Patterson clean the boarding house parlor, then retreated to her room to prepare for the social. She laid out her best dress, a deep blue silk with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't the height of fashion, but it was well made and flattering. As she dressed, she heard the other boarders moving about, preparing for the evening's festivities. Miss Patterson had 2 other long-term boarders, Mr. Fenton, the telegraph operator, and Mrs. Winters, a widow who worked at the mercantile. Both had been cordial but distant in the few interactions Violet had shared with them. At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. Violet's heart quickened as she heard Miss Patterson answer it, followed by the low rumble of Isaac's voice. She checked her appearance one last time in the small mirror above her washstand, pinched a bit of color into her cheeks, and made her way carefully down the stairs. Isaac waited in the parlor, hat in hand, dressed in clean black trousers and a pressed white shirt. He traded his usual work boots for polished ones, and his hair was neatly combed. The sight of him handsome and clearly having made an effort made Violet's breath catch. "Good evening, Miss McGraw," he said, his eyes warming as they took in her appearance. "You look lovely. Thank you." She descended the last few steps, conscious of Miss Patterson watching from the dining room doorway. "You're very punctual. My father always said punctuality shows respect." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The church was only a short walk away, its windows glowing with lamplight. Music spilled into the evening air, along with the sound of laughter and conversation. As they approached, Violet's stride slowed involuntarily. Something wrong? Isaac asked, glancing down at her. "Just gathering myself," she admitted. "First impressions matter." He nodded, understanding. "Town's been curious about you, but you've already won over the children, and that counts for a lot." "And Mrs. Holloway? Has she decided I'm not ruining the town's youth?" Isaac's lips quirked. "Let's just say she's reserving judgment." They entered the church to find its pews pushed against the walls, creating an open space where several couples were already dancing to the music of a fiddle and piano. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and clusters of townspeople stood in conversation, many holding glasses of punch. Conversation dipped momentarily as they entered, curious eyes turning their way. Isaac's hand pressed reassuringly against hers where it rested on his arm. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They'll find something else to gossip about in 5 minutes." True to his word, Isaac led her through the crowd, introducing her to ranchers and their wives, the banker, the owner of the mercantile, and countless others whose names blurred together. Most were welcoming, though Violet noticed several of the women eyeing her cane with that familiar mixture of pity and discomfort. "Miss McGraw," Sheriff Adams approached, a pretty blonde woman on his arm. "Glad you could make it. This is my wife, Elizabeth." "A pleasure," Violet said, smiling at the woman who had raised the irrepressible Tommy. "Tommy's talked of nothing but school all week," Elizabeth said warmly. "Whatever you're doing, please continue. I've never seen him so enthusiastic about learning. He's a bright boy, Violet replied, pleased by the endorsement. Very inquisitive. They chatted for a few minutes before the sheriff was called away to settle a dispute over the punch bowl. As the music changed to a livelier tune, more couples moved to the dance floor. Would you like some punch? Isaac asked, clearly sensing her discomfort as the dancing began in earnest. Yes, thank you. As Isaac moved toward the refreshment table, Violet found herself momentarily alone. She was considering finding a seat when Mrs. Holloway appeared at her elbow, accompanied by a slender man with a scholarly appearance. Miss McGraw, I'd like to introduce Mr. Howard Bennett, Mrs. Holloway said. Mr. Bennett is visiting from Phoenix. He's considering establishing a law practice here. How do you do, Mr. Bennett? Violet said politely. The pleasure is mine, Miss McGraw. Bennett's eyes, unlike most people's, didn't immediately drop to her cane. Mrs. Holloway tells me you're from Boston originally. I attended Harvard Law myself. Did you? My father was a professor of literature at Boston College. Bennett's face lit with genuine interest. Professor James McGraw, I attended one of his public lectures on Thoreau. Brilliant man. Yes, he was, Violet agreed, warmed by the unexpected connection. I understand he passed recently. My condolences. Thank you, it's been a difficult year. Mrs. Holloway, who had been watching their exchange with evident satisfaction, interjected, Mr. Bennett has expressed interest in becoming involved with the school board. Perhaps you two could discuss some of your educational philosophies. Violet recognized the matchmaking attempt for what it was. Mrs. Holloway clearly thought the educated Mr. Bennett a more suitable companion for the schoolteacher than the livery stable owner. I'd be happy to discuss education anytime, Violet said neutrally. Though tonight is a social occasion. Indeed, Bennett agreed, seemingly oblivious to Mrs. Holloway's machinations. Perhaps I could call at the schoolhouse next week. I'd be interested in seeing how education is conducted on the frontier. Of course. Violet spotted Isaac returning with 2 cups of punch and felt an unexpected surge of relief. Ah, Mr. Xavier, Mrs. Holloway said, her tone cooling noticeably. Mr. Bennett, this is Isaac Xavier. He runs our livery stable. Good to meet you, Isaac said, handing Violet her punch. Bennett, you said, staying in town long, a week or two, while I consider my options. Bennett smiled at Violet, though I find myself increasingly inclined to stay. An awkward silence fell, broken when the music changed again to a slow waltz. Bennett turned to Violet with a hopeful expression. Miss McGraw, would you do me the honor of this dance? Violet froze, caught off guard. She hadn't danced since before her illness, and the prospect of attempting it now, in front of the entire town, was terrifying. I don't dance, Mr. Bennett, she said finally. But thank you for the invitation. Bennett looked momentarily confused, then understanding dawned as he glanced at her cane. My apologies. I didn't consider no apology necessary, Violet said quickly, embarrassment heating her cheeks. Perhaps you join me for some air instead. Bennett suggested, it's rather warm in here. Before Violet could respond, Isaac spoke up. Actually, I believe Miss McGraw promised to introduce me to Reverend Patterson, if you'll excuse us. Without waiting for a response, he guided Violet away, his hand warm at the small of her back. You didn't have to do that, she murmured when they were out of earshot. I could have managed. I know you could have, Isaac replied, but his timing was terrible and Mrs. Holloway was enjoying your discomfort too much. You noticed that too, Violet smiled ruefully. She seems determined to push Mr. Bennett and me together. Bennett seems decent enough, Isaac conceded, though there was a tightness around his eyes. Harvard Law and all that. Are you impressed by Harvard Law, Mr. Xavier? She teased, attempting to lighten the mood. Not particularly, he admitted with a half-smile. Though I suppose some women might be, Violet laughed, some might. I grew up surrounded by academics, they can be terribly dull. Isaac's expression relaxed somewhat. Is that why you became a teacher instead of marrying one of those Boston professors? I became a teacher because I love teaching, she corrected. As for marrying a professor, that opportunity never presented itself. She left unspoken the reality that after her illness, potential suitors had quickly disappeared, uncomfortable with her disability or unwilling to consider a wife who might not be able to bear the physical demands of childbearing. Their loss, Isaac said simply. The music ended, and Reverend Patterson approached the center of the room, raising his hands for attention. Friends, neighbors, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. Before we continue our celebration, I'd like to formally welcome our new teacher, Miss Violet McGraw, to Cottonwood Springs. All eyes turned to Violet, who felt herself flushing under the collective gaze. Isaac's hand pressed encouragingly against her back. Miss McGraw comes to us from Massachusetts, bringing Eastern refinement and education to our little community, the Reverend continued. We're fortunate to have found such a qualified teacher for our children, especially on such short notice. Please join me in making her feel welcome. There was a round of applause, which Violet acknowledged with a gracious nod. Now, I believe Mrs. Patterson and the ladies have prepared a special supper. Please help yourselves, the Reverend concluded. As the crowd moved toward the food tables, Isaac leaned close to Violet. See, I told you they'd warm to you. The Reverend was being polite, Violet demurred. I'm still not convinced Mrs. Holloway approves. Mrs. Holloway doesn't approve of sunshine if the Reverend hasn't specifically endorsed it, Isaac said dryly. Are you hungry? They filled plates with fried chicken, cornbread, and various side dishes contributed by the townswomen. Isaac found them seats near the back of the room, slightly removed from the main crowd. As they ate, Violet noticed several people watching them with curious expressions. Is something wrong? She asked, self-consciously checking to ensure she hadn't spilled food on her dress. Isaac followed her gaze to where Mrs. Wilson was whispering to another woman, both glancing their way. Ah, what? He set down his fork, looking slightly uncomfortable. I may have neglected to mention something. Oh, I haven't exactly. Escorted anyone to a social since Rebecca died. He rubbed the back of his neck. So us arriving together is causing some speculation. Violet stared at him. You didn't think to mention this before. Would it have changed your mind about coming? She considered this. Perhaps not. But I would have appreciated knowing the context. Fair enough. He picked up his fork again. For what it's worth, I'm glad I asked you, even if it means dealing with the town gossips. Before Violet could respond, Tommy Adams appeared at their table, slightly out of breath. Miss McGraw. Pa says to tell you we're going to play some games in the churchyard. He thought you might want to watch. That sounds lovely, Tommy. What sort of games? Sack races and three-legged races and such. Nothing too rowdy, Pa says, on account of being at the church and all. Violet glanced at Isaac, who nodded encouragingly. We'll be right there. Outside, lanterns had been hung in the trees surrounding the churchyard, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Children ran about excitedly as Sheriff Adams and several other men marked out racecourses with rope. This is the best part of these socials, Isaac commented as they found a bench along the edge of the yard. The dancing's fine, but watching the kids play, that's real entertainment. Violet nodded agreement, watching as Tommy organized his friends into teams. He's a natural leader. Like his father. Isaac stretched his long legs out in front of him. Sheriff's been good for this town, keeps order without being heavy-handed. The first-race children running with their legs in burlap sacks began with shouts and laughter. Parents cheered their children on, and even the more reserved church members seemed to relax into the festive atmosphere. Miss McGraw, Tommy called, running up after his race. You should join the three-legged race. The adults are going to do one too. Violet's heart sank. Oh, I don't think, actually, Isaac interrupted. I have a better idea. Tommy, go tell your pa we need one more race added to the program. Tommy cocked his head curiously. What kind of race? A special one. I'll explain it to him. As Tommy dashed off, Violet turned to Isaac with suspicion. What are you planning? Something that might change a few minds in this town. He stood, offering his hand. Do you trust me? She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I suppose I do." Isaac led her toward Sheriff Adams, who was listening intently to Tommy's breathless message. When they approached, the sheriff looked up with raised eyebrows. "A special race, Xavier. Tommy here is very mysterious about it." "Nothing complicated," Isaac assured him. "I just think we should have a cane race." "A what now?" "Everyone uses a cane just like Miss McGraw's, level playing field." Isaac's expression was earnest. "Might be educational for the children, and some of the adults too." Understanding dawned on the sheriff's face. "I see. And where do we get all these canes?" "Got about a dozen walking sticks at the livery. Travelers leave them behind sometimes or trade them for supplies. Been meaning to find a use for them." The sheriff glanced at Violet. "Miss McGraw, you comfortable with this idea?" Violet wasn't entirely sure what Isaac was planning, but something in his confident smile made her nod. "Yes, I think so. All right then." The sheriff turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special event. Mr. Xavier is fetching equipment for a cane race." Murmurs of curiosity rippled through the gathering as Isaac jogged toward the livery. He returned shortly with an armful of walking sticks and canes of various styles and sizes. "Now," the sheriff announced as Isaac distributed the canes, "the rules are simple. Each racer must keep one hand on their cane at all times and can only step forward when the cane is planted. First one to the finish line wins." Violet watched with growing amusement as several of the town's most prominent citizens, including Reverend Patterson and Mr. Bennett, lined up with canes in hand. Mrs. Holloway stood at the sidelines, her expression a mixture of disapproval and curiosity. "Ready," Sheriff Adams called. "Go." What followed was nothing short of comedy. The participants, unaccustomed to walking with canes, moved awkwardly and unsteadily. Several nearly fell, and progress toward the finish line was painfully slow. The children howled with laughter, and even the most proper adults couldn't suppress their smiles. "Not as easy as it looks, is it?" Isaac murmured to Violet as they watched. "No, it certainly isn't," she agreed, understanding now what he had intended. This wasn't mockery, it was perspective. After much struggle, Mr. Bennett crossed the finish line first, looking rather pleased with himself despite his ungraceful performance. "Well done, Mr. Bennett," Sheriff Adams congratulated him. "Now, how about a demonstration from someone who knows what they're doing? Miss McGraw, would you honor us?" All eyes turned to Violet. For a moment, panic seized her, the thought of deliberately drawing attention to her disability, of making a spectacle of herself, but then she saw Isaac's encouraging nod and the genuine interest on the children's faces. Taking a deep breath, she stood and walked to the starting line, her own cane tapping rhythmically against the hard earth. The crowd fell silent as she positioned herself. "Ready?" the sheriff asked. Violet nodded, and at his signal, she began walking the course with the grace and efficiency that came from years of practice. Her movements were smooth, her pace steady, and she reached the finish line in half the time it had taken the others. The crowd erupted in applause, led by her students who cheered enthusiastically. Even Mrs. Holloway appeared grudgingly impressed. "That," Sheriff Adams announced, "is skill born of necessity and practice, something we could all learn from." As Violet returned to where Isaac waited, she felt a curious lightness. For the first time since arriving in Cottonwood Springs, she didn't feel her cane was a mark of shame or an object of pity. It was simply part of her, neither hidden nor highlighted. "Thank you," she said quietly to Isaac. "That was inspired. Just thought some folks needed their perspectives adjusted," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Including, perhaps me. You've been so worried about what everyone thinks of your cane that you've been hiding behind it in a way." His expression softened. "You're more than capable, Violet. Everyone can see that now." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her heart flutter. "Mr. Xavier," Mrs. Holloway's voice interrupted whatever Violet might have said in response. The older woman approached, her usual stern expression somewhat tempered. That was an interesting demonstration. Just a bit of fun, Mrs. Holloway, Isaac replied easily. Indeed, she turned to Violet. Miss McGraw, I may have been hasty in my assessment of your suitability for our school. The children clearly respect you, and your condition doesn't appear to hinder your effectiveness. Coming from Mrs. Holloway, this was practically effusive praise. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I appreciate your confidence. The church bell rang 9 times, signaling the hour. The social will be wrapping up soon, Mrs. Holloway noted. Reverend Patterson doesn't approve of gatherings extending too late into the evening, encourages impropriety. With a final nod, she moved away to join the Reverend, who was beginning to usher people back inside. High praise from the Dragon Lady, Isaac commented when she was out of earshot. You've officially been accepted. Violet laughed. I suppose I have, though I suspect it's temporary approval at best. Best enjoy it while it lasts, then. He offered his arm. Shall we head back inside for the final hymn? It's tradition. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly. After the closing hymn, Isaac walked Violet back to the boarding house, their path lit by a nearly full moon. I had a lovely time, Violet said as they reached the porch. Thank you for escorting me, my pleasure. Isaac lingered, seeming reluctant to leave. Would you like to join me for a ride tomorrow? The countryside's beautiful after a rain, and Daisy could use the exercise. A ride? Violet hesitated. I'm not sure I'm much of a horsewoman these days. We'll take it slow, and I'll be right beside you the whole time. His expression was hopeful. Say yes. Something about his eagerness was irresistible. Yes, then, what time? After church, about 1 o'clock. I'll be ready. He stepped back, settling his hat more firmly on his head. Good night, Violet. Good night, Isaac. She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the moonlit street before entering the boarding house. Miss Patterson was waiting in the parlor, pretending to read a book. You had a nice evening? She asked, setting aside her book. Very nice, thank you. Mr. Xavier seems quite taken with you, Miss Patterson observed, her tone carefully neutral. Violet felt herself blushing. He's being kind to a newcomer, that's all. Miss Patterson's expression suggested she believed otherwise. Well, he's a good man. Hardworking, dependable, the kind who stands by his commitments. With that cryptic assessment, she bid Violet good night and retired to her room, leaving Violet to ponder whether she'd just received the boarding house owner's blessing or warning. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Violet attended church services, where she received many more friendly greetings than she had the previous Sunday. Reverend Patterson's sermon touched on acceptance and community, and Violet wondered if the previous night's cane race had influenced his choice of topic. After the service, she returned to the boarding house to change into her riding outfit, a plain brown skirt and white shirtwaist that she wouldn't mind getting dusty. She was just pinning her hat when she heard the now familiar sound of hoofbeats outside. Isaac waited with 2 horses, Daisy and a steady-looking bay gelding. He'd exchanged his Sunday best for his usual working clothes, though his shirt looked freshly pressed. Ready for an adventure? He asked as he helped her mount. I'm not sure how adventurous I can be, Violet admitted, adjusting her skirt over the side saddle. It's been years since I've ridden regularly. We'll start slow. He swung easily into his own saddle. There's a nice spot about 2 miles outside town. Creek runs through a little meadow. Thought we might have a picnic. He patted a saddlebag that presumably contained their lunch. Violet felt a flutter of anticipation and a twinge of anxiety. Being alone with Isaac, miles from town, pushed the boundaries of propriety. But then, frontier towns operated under different social rules than Boston, and she was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions. They rode at a leisurely pace, Isaac keeping Daisy on a lead rein until Violet grew more comfortable in the saddle. The landscape spread out around them, rolling hills covered in scrub and cacti, distant mountains shimmering in the heat. It's beautiful, Violet said, breathing in the clean desert air, so different from Massachusetts. Takes some getting used to, Isaac agreed. I missed trees when I first came out here from Texas, but there's something about this land, the openness of it, makes a person feel free. Is that why you stayed after? She trailed off, not wanting to bring up painful memories. After Rebecca and James died, he nodded slowly. Partly. We'd made a life here, and the thought of starting over somewhere else alone, well, it didn't appeal much. Besides, the town needed a livery. You seem to care a great deal about Cottonwood Springs. It's home now. He glanced at her. What about you? Did you come west just for the teaching position? Violet adjusted her grip on the reins. There wasn't much left for me in Boston after my father died. My mother passed when I was 16, and I have no siblings. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher out west, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start. Away from people who knew about your leg, his directness still startled her. Yes, she admitted, though I've discovered that news travels quickly, even on the frontier. People talk because they're curious, not necessarily because they're judging, Isaac said. Well, except for Mrs. Holloway, she's definitely judging, Violet laughed. I think she's warming to me, slightly. They continued on, the conversation flowing easily between them. Isaac pointed out local landmarks and shared stories about the area's history. As they rode, Violet found herself relaxing, both in the saddle and in Isaac's company. The creek he'd mentioned came into view, a ribbon of silver cutting through a small grassy meadow dotted with wildflowers. A cluster of cottonwood trees provided welcome shade from the midday sun. It's lovely, Violet said as Isaac helped her dismount. One of my favorite spots. He tethered the horses where they could graze, then spread a blanket beneath the largest cottonwood. From his saddlebag he produced bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a bottle of lemonade. You thought of everything, Violet observed, settling carefully onto the blanket, her cane beside her. Miss Patterson helped with the food, he admitted, arranging their simple meal. She seems to approve of our friendship. There was a question in the way he said friendship, as though testing whether the word was adequate. She mentioned last night that you're a good man, Violet said, accepting a piece of bread and cheese. I believe her exact words were hardworking and dependable. Isaac smiled. High praise from Miss Patterson. She doesn't hand out compliments easily. Neither does Mrs. Holloway, yet she almost apologized to me last night. The cane race worked its magic. Isaac stretched out on his side, propped on one elbow. Though I suspect Tommy's enthusiasm for school has done more to improve your standing than anything else. The Adams family is well respected. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the babbling creek and the occasional whicker from the horses. Violet felt more at peace than she had in months, perhaps years. There was something about Isaac's steady presence that calmed her usual anxieties about how others perceived her. May I ask about your leg? Isaac said suddenly. You mentioned a childhood fever, but Violet set down her lemonade, considering how much to share. Few people had ever asked directly, most preferred to speculate behind her back. I was 10, she began. Scarlet fever swept through Boston that year. Many children died. I survived, but the fever affected my right leg. The muscles wasted away, and the doctors couldn't explain why it didn't recover like the rest of me. She ran her hand absently over her skirt, feeling the thinness of her leg beneath. My father consulted specialists in New York and even London, but the verdict was always the same: I would need a cane for the rest of my life. And your mother, how did she take it? She blamed herself for not recognizing the symptoms sooner. Violet's voice softened with old pain. She never said so, but I could see it in her eyes. When she died 6 years later, my father said grief had weakened her heart, but I always wondered if she felt responsible for my condition. Isaac reached out, covering her hand with his. Children get sick, it wasn't anyone's fault. I know that now, but understanding doesn't always ease the feeling. She turned her hand to briefly squeeze his before withdrawing. What about you? You mentioned Texas. Isaac accepted the change of subject gracefully. My father ran cattle near San Antonio, hard-working man, but harsh. Expected the same drive from his children. My brother thrived under it, became the son my father wanted. I was less suited to ranching. Yet you work with horses now. Ironic, isn't it? He smiled wryly. Turns out I liked the animals well enough. It was my father's methods I objected to. When I was 18, we had a particularly heated disagreement about how to break a spirited colt. I left that night, worked my way west, learning gentler methods from various horsemen along the way. And your family, do you keep in touch? My brother writes occasionally. My father died 10 years ago without ever acknowledging he might have been wrong. There was old hurt in his voice, though well healed. I made my peace with it, found my own path, which led you here. Eventually, met Rebecca in Tucson. She was teaching there like you. When Cottonwood Springs needed a livery owner, we decided to settle here. His expression softened at the memory. She loved this town despite its quirks, said it had heart. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. He gazed out at the creek for a moment. She would have liked you. The simple statement touched Violet deeply. I would have liked to know her. Isaac met her eyes, his expression serious. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. After losing Rebecca and James, I figured that part of my life was over. I'd just focus on the livery, be the dependable bachelor everyone could count on but no one had to worry about. Violet's heart began to race. And now I find myself looking forward to noon every day, just so I can bring you lunch and hear about your morning. I wake up thinking about what might make you smile. He sat up, moving slightly closer. I know it hasn't been long, but there's something between us, Violet, something I haven't felt in years. Tell me I'm not imagining it. The directness of his words both thrilled and terrified her. You're not imagining it, she admitted softly. But Isaac, are you sure it's not just kindness or perhaps loneliness? I'm not exactly what most men seek in a wife. What do you think most men seek? Someone whole, she said plainly. Someone who could keep up with ranch work or bear children easily. Someone who doesn't require accommodations. Isaac's expression hardened slightly. If that's what you think of me, that I'd be so shallow. No, Violet interrupted, placing her hand on his arm. That's not what I meant. I'm talking about practical concerns, not your character. I've had suitors before, Isaac. Men who claimed my cane didn't matter until it did. Until they realized what it would mean to build a life with someone like me. Someone like you, he repeated. You mean someone intelligent, compassionate, and determined. Someone who traveled across the country alone to build a new life. Someone who can silence a classroom of rowdy children with a look, according to Sheriff Adams. Violet felt tears threatening. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean, and it's nonsense. His voice was firm but gentle. Your cane is part of you, yes, but it's just that a part, not the whole. It's the first thing people see. Only until they know you. He took her hands in his. Violet, I've watched you this past week. You've won over most of the town already, not because they're pitying you, but because you're exactly what Cottonwood Springs needed, a teacher who cares, who pushes the children to be their best. A tear escaped despite her efforts, trailing down her cheek. Isaac reached up to brush it away with his thumb. I'm not asking for promises, he said softly. I'm just asking for a chance to show you that what I feel isn't misplaced kindness or loneliness. It's real. Violet looked into his eyes, honest, hopeful, and utterly sincere, and felt something inside her yield. All right, she whispered. A chance. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, and Violet found herself responding with a fervor that surprised them both. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. Even with the dust and the travel-worn appearance, she teased, especially then. You looked so determined, standing there with your cane, taking the measure of the town. I knew right then you were someone special. They spent the remainder of the afternoon by the creek. talking of everything and nothing, occasionally sharing gentle kisses that grew more confident as the day wore on. By the time they packed up their picnic and mounted to return to town, the sun was beginning to sink toward the western mountains. People will talk, Violet noted as they rode side by side, Cottonwood Springs visible in the distance. Let them, Isaac replied easily. Though we should probably maintain some propriety for the sake of your position, no more kissing in public. Agreed. She glanced at him, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks, though perhaps in private. The look he gave her sent warmth spiraling through her core. I believe that can be arranged, Miss McGraw. As they reached the outskirts of town, reality began to intrude on their idyllic afternoon. Several people were visible on the main street, and Violet straightened in her saddle, adopting a more formal posture. Shall I take you directly to the boarding house? Isaac asked, understanding her concern for appearances. Yes, I think that would be best. They rode the remainder of the way in companionable silence. As they approached the boarding house, Violet noticed Mr. Bennet sitting on the porch, apparently waiting. Her heart sank slightly at the complication. Your Harvard admirer appears to be calling on you, Isaac observed, his tone carefully neutral. He mentioned visiting the school, not a social call, Violet replied, dismounting with Isaac's assistance. Miss McGraw, Bennet called, rising to his feet. I was hoping to catch you before dinner. Mr. Bennet, this is unexpected. I apologize for not sending word ahead. Bennet glanced at Isaac, then back to Violet. I was hoping we might continue our conversation from last night, about educational philosophy, of course. Violet turned to Isaac. Thank you for the lovely afternoon, Mr. Xavier, and for exercising Daisy. She's a wonderful mount. Isaac tipped his hat, understanding her need to maintain propriety. My pleasure, Miss McGraw. Good evening to you both. As he led the horses away, Violet felt a pang of regret at the formality that had descended between them. But such was the reality of small-town life. Their budding relationship would have to navigate not only her physical limitations, but also the watchful eyes of Cottonwood Springs. You've been riding? Bennet asked, offering his arm to escort her up the porch steps. Mr. Xavier was kind enough to show me some of the countryside, Violet replied, accepting his assistance out of politeness rather than necessity. I see. Bennet's tone suggested he saw rather more than she'd stated. Mrs. Holloway mentioned you two arrived together at the social last night as well. Mr. Xavier has been very welcoming since my arrival, Violet said carefully. As have many of the townspeople. Bennet nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's a tight-knit community. I've been impressed by how quickly they've accepted me, considering I'm an outsider with Eastern credentials. Perhaps they recognize the value of having a lawyer nearby, Violet suggested as they settled into the porch chairs. Cottonwood Springs seems to be growing. That's precisely what interests me about the position. Bennet leaned forward earnestly. The town has potential. The railroad may come through within the next few years. Property values will increase substantially. You sound quite decided already. Nearly so. He smiled warmly at her. And conversations like the one we had last night only strengthen my inclination to stay. It's rare to find someone with shared intellectual interests in these frontier towns. Violet recognized the direction the conversation was taking and sought to gently redirect it. Have you spoken with Sheriff Adams about the legal needs of the community? I understand there have been disputes over water rights with neighboring ranches. Bennet accepted the change of topic gracefully, and they spent the next half hour discussing the town's development and potential legal challenges. As the dinner bell rang inside the boarding house, he stood to take his leave. Miss McGraw, I've greatly enjoyed our conversation. Perhaps you would allow me to escort you to dinner tomorrow evening. The hotel dining room is quite adequate, I'm told. Violet hesitated. Bennet was intelligent, educated, and clearly interested in her. In Boston, she might have considered him an ideal match. But her heart had already begun to align itself with a very different man. "That's very kind, Mr. Bennet, but I must decline. My evenings are occupied with lesson planning and school board reports." It wasn't entirely untrue, though not the complete reason for her refusal. Of course. "Your dedication to your students is admirable." If he was disappointed, he hid it well. "Perhaps another time. Perhaps." Violet rose, retrieving her cane from where it leaned against the porch railing. "Thank you for stopping by, Mr. Bennet." As she watched him walk away, Violet wondered if she was being foolish. Bennet represented security, shared interests, and social compatibility. Isaac represented uncertainty, passion, and a connection she couldn't quite define but felt to her core. With a sigh, she entered the boarding house, where Miss Patterson was setting the table for dinner. "Mr. Bennet seems quite taken with you," the older woman observed. "Mrs. Holloway will be pleased." "Mrs. Holloway seems unusually invested in my personal affairs," Violet commented, taking her seat at the table. "She believes a teacher should set an example for the community. A proper marriage would settle any concerns about your permanence here." "I have a 1-year contract with the school board," Violet pointed out. "My permanence is legally established." Miss Patterson sniffed. "Contracts can be broken, or not renewed." The implication was clear. Violet's position might depend on more than her teaching abilities. The politics of a small town were beginning to reveal themselves. "I saw you riding with Mr. Xavier earlier," Miss Patterson continued, changing the subject. "He seems equally interested in your company." Violet sipped her water, considering her response. "Mr. Xavier has been very kind in helping me become acquainted with the town. Miss Patterson placed a tureen of stew on the table. "You should know that Rebecca Xavier was my niece." Violet nearly choked on her water. "Your niece? I had no idea. Few make the connection." "She used her married name, and I keep my personal affairs private." Miss Patterson's usually stern expression softened slightly. "She was a wonderful girl. Her death nearly broke Isaac. For 2 years he barely spoke to anyone except about livery business." "I'm so sorry for your loss," Violet said softly. "Thank you." Miss Patterson ladled stew into bowls as Mr. Fenton and Mrs. Winters joined them at the table. "I mention it only because I've noticed a change in him these past days. A lightness I haven't seen since before the influenza took Rebecca and little James." Before Violet could respond, the conversation turned to town matters as Mr. Fenton shared news that had come over the telegraph that day. But Miss Patterson's words lingered in her mind throughout dinner, adding another layer of complexity to her feelings for Isaac. The following weeks fell into a pleasant routine. Violet's days were filled with teaching, and Isaac continued to join her for lunch whenever possible. Their relationship developed quietly, away from the prying eyes of the town's stolen moments in the schoolhouse after the children had gone. Sunday afternoon rides to their special spot by the creek, and occasional evenings on the boarding house porch, where Isaac would tell stories that made her laugh until tears came to her eyes. Mr. Bennet, seeming to recognize the situation, maintained a friendly but less overtly interested demeanor, focusing on establishing his law practice. Mrs. Holloway continued to watch Violet with a mixture of reluctant approval and lingering skepticism. But even she had to acknowledge that the children were thriving under their new teacher's guidance. One particularly warm Saturday in late October, Isaac suggested they ride to a place he called Eagle Bluff, a mesa overlooking the valley where Cottonwood Springs nestled. "It's a bit of a climb at the end," he warned as they set out, "but the view is worth it, and the trail is well established." "I can manage," Violet assured him, having grown more confident in both her riding and her ability to navigate difficult terrain with her cane. The ride took them through rugged country, the landscape becoming increasingly dramatic as they climbed. Finally, they reached a point where the horses could go no further, and Isaac helped Violet dismount. "It's about a 1/4-mile hike from here," he said, securing the horses in a small grove of pinyon pines. "Take your time, there's no rush." The trail was indeed well worn but steep in places. Violet leaned heavily on her cane, grateful for Isaac's steadying hand on her elbow at the most challenging sections. Despite her determination, she found herself breathless and perspiring by the time they reached the summit. "Oh my," she gasped, momentarily forgetting her discomfort as the vista spread before her. The entire valley lay below, Cottonwood Springs a cluster of toy-like buildings in the distance, surrounded by the patchwork of farms and ranches. Mountains rose in every direction, their slopes painted with the gold and russet of autumn vegetation. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Isaac said, coming to stand beside her. "It's magnificent." Violet shaded her eyes against the sun. "I can see why you wanted to bring me here." "This isn't actually why I brought you here," Isaac admitted, suddenly looking nervous. "Or not the only reason." He guided her to a flat rock where they could sit comfortably, then took both her hands in his. His expression was so serious that Violet felt a flutter of anxiety. "Isaac. Is something wrong?" "No, everything's right actually, for the first time in years." He took a deep breath. "Violet, these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember since losing Rebecca and James. You've brought light back into my life when I thought that part of me was gone forever." "You've done the same for me," she said softly. "I never expected to find someone who could see past." She gestured vaguely toward her cane. "That's just it," Isaac said earnestly. "I don't see past it, I see you completely. Your cane is part of who you are. It's shaped your determination, your empathy, your understanding of struggle. I wouldn't change it any more than I'd change your eyes or your laugh or the way you furrow your brow when you're concentrating." Tears pricked at Violet's eyes. "Isaac. Let me finish or I'll lose my nerve." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I've been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the right moment." He opened the pouch and tipped a ring into his palm, a simple gold band set with a small diamond. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died, said to save it for when I found a woman worth building a life with." Violet's heart thundered in her chest as Isaac slid from the rock to one knee before her. "Violet McGraw, I know it hasn't been long, but when you know, you know. And I know with absolute certainty that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Emotions flooded through her: joy, disbelief, fear, hope. "Isaac, are you certain?" "My leg has nothing to do with this," he interrupted gently, "except that it carried you to me." With those simple words, the last of Violet's doubts dissolved. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "yes, I will marry you." Isaac's face lit with such happiness that it nearly took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, then cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a passion that left no doubt of his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Violet McGraw." "And I love you, Isaac Xavier." The words came easily, naturally, as though her heart had known them all along. They spent the remainder of the afternoon on the bluff, making plans for their future. Isaac's quarters above the livery weren't suitable for a married couple, but he'd been saving to build a proper house on a small plot of land he owned at the edge of town. "It's not much, just 2 acres, he explained, "but there's a good well and room for a garden. Maybe even children someday, if you want them." "Children," Violet repeated softly. It was a dream she'd long ago set aside, believing no man would want to risk having children with a woman whose mobility was compromised. "Do you think I could?" "The doctor in Prescott delivered a baby for a woman with a condition similar to yours last year," Isaac said. "Mother and child did just fine. But even if that weren't an option, there are always children who need homes. We could build our family in different ways." The thoughtfulness of his answer, that he'd already considered these practical concerns, touched Violet deeply. "You've thought about this? About a future with you?" "Yes, extensively," he smiled, tracing her cheek with his finger. "When I thought I'd lost everything that mattered, you stepped off that stagecoach and reminded me that life offers second chances." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they reluctantly gathered their things and began the careful descent. The return journey took longer, as both were disinclined to rush, savoring the private joy of their engagement before facing the inevitable storm of town gossip it would generate. When should we tell people? Violet asked as they approached Cottonwood Springs, the first lights beginning to twinkle in windows. I'd like to speak to Miss Patterson first, out of respect for her connection to Rebecca, Isaac said. After that, we can tell whoever you wish. Though in this town, we'll only need to tell one person and everyone will know by sundown. Mrs. Holloway will be scandalized, Violet noted, not entirely displeased by the prospect. She had such hopes for Mr. Bennet and me. Bennet's a good man, he'll find someone else to court. Isaac guided his horse closer to hers. Perhaps Mrs. Holloway herself. She's only been a widow for 15 years? Violet laughed, the sound carrying on the evening air. You're terrible. You love me anyway. I do, she agreed, marveling at how natural those words felt. I really do. Miss Patterson received the news with quiet satisfaction, as though she'd been expecting it all along. Rebecca would approve, she said simply, taking Violet's hands in hers. She valued happiness above all else, and it's clear Isaac makes you happy. He does, Violet confirmed. Though I worry some might think we're rushing things. Life is too short to waste time on others' opinions, Miss Patterson said firmly. I lost my Charles to a mining accident after only 6 months of marriage. Those months were the happiest of my life, and I've never regretted a single day, even knowing how briefly we'd have together. It was the most personal revelation Miss Patterson had ever shared, and Violet felt honored by the confidence. Thank you for your blessing. It means a great deal to both of us. As Isaac had predicted, news of their engagement spread through Cottonwood Springs like wildfire. By Monday morning, every child in Violet's classroom seemed aware that their teacher would soon become Mrs. Xavier. The reactions from the town were mixed, but largely positive. Sheriff and Mrs. Adams stopped by the schoolhouse to offer their congratulations, as did several other parents. Mrs. Holloway, predictably, was less enthusiastic. I must say, Miss McGraw, this seems rather sudden, she said when she cornered Violet after school on Tuesday. Mr. Bennet is quite disappointed. Mr. Bennet and I shared some pleasant conversations, nothing more, Violet replied evenly. I believe he's already turned his attentions to Miss Johnson at the Mercantile, HMPH. She's a shop girl, hardly suitable for a man of his education. Perhaps Mr. Bennet values qualities beyond social standing. Violet gathered her teaching materials, eager to end the conversation. If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Holloway, I have lessons to prepare. One moment. Mrs. Holloway's tone softened slightly. Despite my reservations about the haste of your engagement, I must acknowledge that the children are thriving under your guidance. The school board met yesterday and voted to extend your contract for an additional year, should you wish to continue teaching after your marriage. Violet was genuinely surprised. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I would very much like to continue. Good. That's settled then. Mrs. Holloway adjusted her shawl. Though I still think you might have aimed higher than a livery stable owner. With that parting shot, she swept out, leaving Violet torn between irritation and amusement. By the time Isaac arrived for their usual lunch, she had decided on the latter. Mrs. Holloway thinks I'm settling, she reported, unpacking the basket he'd brought. Apparently, a Harvard-educated lawyer would have been a more suitable match for a teacher of my capabilities. Isaac laughed, pulling up his usual chair. Did you tell her about my secret collection of Shakespeare folios? I think that might strain even her credulity. Violet handed him a sandwich. She did mention that the school board has extended my contract, though. They want me to continue teaching after we're married. That's good news, isn't it? Unless you'd prefer not to. No, I want to continue. I love teaching and the children are wonderful. She hesitated. But what about children of our own, eventually, I mean? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Isaac reached across the desk to squeeze her hand. For now, let's focus on the wedding. Unless you'd prefer a long engagement, I don't see the point in waiting, Violet said honestly. though we should probably allow enough time for a proper ceremony. The Reverend will insist on that if nothing else. Christmas, Isaac suggested. It's 2 months away. Enough time to prepare, but not so long that Mrs. Holloway can marshal opposition. Violet laughed. Christmas it is. The following weeks passed in a flurry of wedding preparations alongside Violet's teaching duties. Miss Patterson appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator, working with the church ladies to plan a ceremony befitting the town's schoolteacher. Isaac, meanwhile, threw himself into preparing their future home, hiring carpenters to help build a modest but comfortable house on his land. Violet visited the construction site whenever possible, marveling at how quickly the structure took shape. Isaac had incorporated thoughtful details with her in mind: a railing along the porch steps, smooth floors without thresholds that might trip her cane, a first-floor bedroom to avoid daily stairs. "You've thought of everything," she said, as he showed her the nearly completed interior in mid-December. "I want our home to be a place where you never have to worry about managing," Isaac explained, leading her through the sunny kitchen. "Where your cane is just a part of our lives, not an obstacle to be overcome daily." Violet's throat tightened with emotion. "I've never had that before. Even my father's house in Boston had awkward steps and narrow hallways that required constant navigation. Well, this house is being built for you." Isaac put his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "For us." The week before Christmas, a winter storm blew through Cottonwood Springs, bringing unseasonably cold temperatures and a dusting of snow that delighted the schoolchildren but complicated last-minute wedding preparations. The day before the ceremony, Violet dismissed her class early as the temperature dropped precipitously. "Be sure to go straight home," she instructed as they bundled up. "No dawdling in this weather." She was just locking the schoolhouse when she heard rapid hoofbeats approaching. Sheriff Adams reined in his horse beside her, his expression grim. "Miss McGraw, you need to come with me. There's been an accident at the livery." Violet's heart seemed to stop. "Isaac, is he?" "He's alive," the sheriff assured her quickly, "but he's been hurt. Doc Sanders is with him now." He dismounted and helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The ride to the livery took only minutes, but to Violet it felt like an eternity. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities. The livery was unusually quiet as they approached. Sheriff Adams helped her down and led her inside, where several men stood in a somber group. They parted as she entered, revealing Isaac sitting on a hay bale, his face pale beneath a bloody bandage wrapped around his head. His left arm was splinted and bound to his chest. "Violet," he said, attempting to rise when he saw her. "Stay put," ordered a thin man Violet recognized as the town doctor. "That concussion isn't going to heal if you keep moving around." "What happened?" Violet asked, rushing to Isaac's side as quickly as her cane would allow. "Roof beam gave way," one of the other men explained. "Cold made the wood brittle, I reckon. Came down right on top of him while he was saddling my horse." "Could have been worse," Sheriff Adams added. "Beam just grazed his head, broke his arm when he fell, though." The doctor finished securing the splint. "He needs rest. Concussion's mild, but that arm's going to take weeks to heal properly. I've said it, but he'll need to keep it immobilized." "I'll take care of him," Violet said firmly. Isaac looked up at her, his eyes slightly unfocused. "The wedding will proceed as planned," she interrupted. "Unless you're having second thoughts," a ghost of his usual smile appeared. "Never." "Then it's settled. Sheriff, could you help me get him to Miss Patterson's? I don't think he should be alone above the livery tonight." With the sheriff's assistance, Isaac was installed in Miss Patterson's rarely used guest room. The doctor left instructions and promised to return in the morning, though he assured Violet that with proper rest, Isaac should be well enough for the ceremony the following evening. Once they were alone, Violet sat beside the bed, taking Isaac's uninjured hand in hers. "You gave me quite a scare." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with pain despite the laudanum the doctor had administered. Tom Jenkins needed his horse for an emergency ride to Prescott. Wouldn't have been in the stable otherwise. It's not your fault. She smoothed his hair back from the bandage, though your timing could use improvement. Getting injured the day before our wedding is hardly convenient. He managed a weak chuckle. Always did have a flair for drama. Rest now, she said softly. I'll be right here, my beautiful Violet, he murmured, eyes already closing as the medication took effect. So strong. She watched him drift into sleep, her heart full of love and a new understanding. For years, she had been the one needing assistance, the one people worried might not manage. Now, the roles were temporarily reversed. Isaac needed her strength, her care. The realization was both sobering and empowering. The next morning brought clear skies and slightly warmer temperatures. The doctor pronounced Isaac well enough for the ceremony, provided he remained seated throughout and retired immediately afterward. Miss Patterson adjusted the wedding plans accordingly, moving the reception to the following day when Isaac might be stronger. By evening, the church was filled with nearly every resident of Cottonwood Springs. Candles and pine boughs decorated the simple space, filling it with warm light and the fresh scent of evergreen. Isaac, pale but determined, sat in a chair at the altar, his arm still bound to his chest but his eyes clear and focused as Violet walked toward him on Sheriff Adams's arm. She had chosen a simple dress of ivory silk, elegant but practical. In her hands, she carried a small bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers. But what drew every eye was not her dress or flowers, but her cane transformed by loving hands. Isaac had secretly arranged for it to be decorated with a wrapping of white ribbon and small sprigs of holly, making it not just a necessary aid, but a deliberate part of her bridal ensemble. When she reached him, tears of gratitude and love shining in her eyes, Isaac took her free hand and raised it to his lips. Then, to the astonishment of the congregation, he leaned forward and gently kissed the decorated handle of her cane. "It carried you to me," he said simply, loudly enough for those in the front pews to hear. "And I will be grateful for that every day of our lives." A murmur of appreciation ran through the church. Even Mrs. Holloway, seated primly in the front row, appeared to be discreetly dabbing at her eyes. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Reverend Patterson spoke of resilience, of finding strength in each other's weaknesses, of building a life on mutual respect and unwavering support. When it came time for the vows, Isaac insisted on standing, leaning slightly on Violet for balance, a physical manifestation of the partnership they were forming. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend concluded. "You may kiss your bride." Isaac cupped Violet's face with his good hand and kissed her tenderly, the church erupting in applause around them. The winter passed peacefully as the newlyweds settled into their new home and Isaac's arm healed. By spring, life had found a comfortable rhythm. Violet continued teaching, more confident than ever in her role, while Isaac's business flourished as Cottonwood Springs grew steadily. On the one-year anniversary of Violet's arrival in town, Isaac surprised her with a special dinner at home. As they sat on their porch afterward, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, he presented her with a small package. "What's this?" she asked, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a delicate silver charm in the shape of a bird, similar to the one carved into her cane's handle. "I had it made in Prescott," Isaac explained. "Thought you might like it as a reminder of how far you've come this past year." Violet turned the charm over in her palm, deeply touched. "It's beautiful, thank you. You've changed this town, you know," Isaac said, settling his arm around her shoulders. "The children adore you. Even Mrs. Holloway admits you're the best teacher they've ever had." She actually said that. "Well, she said you were adequately fulfilling your responsibilities, despite your obvious limitations. Coming from her, that's high praise." Violet laughed, leaning into his embrace. "And to think, a year ago I was terrified of what people would think of a teacher with a cane. And now—" She glanced toward the schoolhouse, visible in the distance. Now I realize that what I once saw as my greatest weakness has actually been my strength. It taught me patience, perseverance, and how to look beyond the surface of things. She turned to Isaac, placing her hand against his cheek. It led me to you. Isaac covered her hand with his own. To us, he corrected gently, and to our future. As if on cue, there was a soft cry from inside the house. Violet smiled and rose, retrieving her cane. Speaking of our future, your daughter is awake. 2 months earlier, Violet had given birth to a healthy baby girl they'd named Rebecca Margaret Xavier, in honor of both Isaac's first wife and Violet's mother. The pregnancy had been challenging but ultimately successful, thanks to Dr. Sanders's care and Isaac's unwavering support. Isaac stood to follow her inside. Our daughter, he corrected, just as he always did, and she has her mother's determination. In the nursery, little Rebecca had indeed worked herself into a standing position in her crib, her chubby hands gripping the rails as she bounced experimentally on sturdy legs. Seeing her parents, she let out a delighted squeal. Strong legs, Isaac noted proudly. She'll be running before we know it. Let's hope she walks first, Violet replied, lifting the baby into her arms while balancing against her cane with practiced ease. One milestone at a time. As she held their daughter close, feeling Isaac's arm wrap around them both, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the frightened woman stepping off the stagecoach, dreading the stares her cane would attract, to this a respected teacher, a beloved wife, a new mother, standing confidently in the home built just for her. The cane that had once seemed a burden was now simply a part of her story, one that had carried her not just to Isaac, but to a life fuller and richer than she had ever dared to imagine.